Nick, welcome to the podcast. I am so happy that you're here. This is a special episode of the podcast. You're coming to us directly from Marrakesh, having just finished the Atlas Mountain Race. Congratulations. How are you doing?
Thanks. I'm doing well. I had a full scrub down at a Marrakesh hammam yesterday. I feel reborn. I'm a new person, and I've had a lot of food and a lot of sleep in the past 48 hours or so. So I'm feeling pretty caught up.
I'm glad that you're getting a chance to catch up a little bit on sleep and calories. I'm sure, and we can talk through the kind of deficit that you had to put yourself into. But to start it off, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, yeah. I'm Nick Marzano. I am from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the United States. And I've been doing bike pack racing, not for too long. I guess starting fall 2021, I did my first event that was a timed event. We can talk a little bit, I guess, in a bit about what self-supported single stage bike pack racing is. And haven't really been biking for anything more than commuting for more than since before the pandemic. So 2020 is really when I got my first geared bike. Had commuted a ton, but have really dove into the endurance, the adventure, and the ultra endurance side of things. Apart from that, I work in healthcare. I work at a healthcare nonprofit supporting hospitalists who are at the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic and work the medical floor. They're inpatient internal medicine physicians. We provide them with education, advocacy at a place called the Society of Hospital Medicine. Little plug for them since they are so good about supporting my vacation and my adventure habits. Yeah, I could go on, but hopefully that serves as a little
It's
intro.
definitely a great primer. And I'm eventually curious to hear how you balance it all. But one of the things that I caught just now in your intro and that you've mentioned, I think in a few interviews before, is that really you've gotten into cycling in it's been relatively recent. Did you just get bit by the cycling bug, or what was kind of the motivation that got you so interested in this?
Yeah, well, I knew I had been a runner for a while, doing t-shirt races, as I've heard them called, which is great. I was not really an athletic kid in high school. I was a theater kid, a chess club kid, and got into just sort of jogging in college for fitness, and then started doing some races and trying to push PRs into my early 30s. And as I reached my mid 30s, you know, I, I knew that I was interested in transitioning to cycling because my knees were starting to wear out a little bit. My PRs were headed in the wrong direction after about 35. They started to trend downward. And so the appeal of a new sport is that you have zero PRs. Every day is a PR at first. So and eventually pulled the trigger in the pandemic, as so many people did. There was a flood of people to the space, and I don't know what it was about the gravel was super appealing, being off road, away from cars, in nature. Very important to me. As much as I love the city and I love the metropolitan lifestyle, I do really love getting away from it just as much. Love camping, love backpacking and hiking. And so the more I tended toward those side of things, and learned that you strap a couple of bags to your bike and you can push yourself a little bit farther. You can strap a tent to your bike and you can string a few days together. And then I learned about the racing side of things, and I was kind of hooked, because that's where your community ends up. That's the best place to find a community of nutsos, who also like to go put in long days on the bike. And that's been my journey towards the ultra endurance side of things.
I like that. I share that in common with you, is that I'm very much a fan of living in the metropolitan areas, and then kind of getting to escape and going to your adventures. Now, can you walk us through what exactly is bike packing?
Yeah, I mean it's a big question, but I think in the broadest definition, people will make a distinction between what is bike touring and what is bike packing. So what I'm about to say probably doesn't matter a
Sure.
whole lot, but the popular distinction is that bike touring, you might have a couple of panniers on your front and back wheel, those big briefcase size things that you might see folks biking with, not super aerodynamic, but can carry a lot, right? And so you might call that bike touring at a slower pace, or maybe you're doing fewer miles a day, you're sightseeing, maybe you're camping, maybe you're stopping at hotels or inns. And bike packing can look completely similar. It tends to involve a more aerodynamic bag setup. So you'll see bags that are in line with the bike. You have a saddle bag that extends right off the seat post, usually, a front roll off your handlebars, where most people keep light stuff like their sleep kit. And then you've got a frame bag in the middle that could be a full frame bag or just a half frame bag with your bottles underneath. If you picture that triangle, you can either fill out that triangle or fill part of that triangle in your bike. And then, bits and bobs here and there. You can do whatever sort of hybrid of the two. Maybe you've got a couple of like fork bags that almost look like light panniers at that point. Yeah, so I think the aerodynamics is the main distinguishing feature. I guess bike packing tends to be, doesn't have to be, but it tends to be more gravel and off-road, and tends to imply, even if you're not racing, I think it tends to imply, to me at least, longer days in the saddle, as opposed to maybe 30 miles, stop, sightsee, and be on a more leisurely tour.
I think that's a great and nuanced definition. I always go with the much more less subtle or less detailed definition of it's just a way to extend your time on the bike, and so you carry as whatever you can to go as far as you can, and and in many cases as fast,
There
right?
you go.
Now, Now, I want to put this in context of the Atlas Mountain Race. And as we kind of walk through your history and your build up to this, just because I think a lot of the listeners are going to be almost overwhelmed at the challenge that you just finished. So what is the Atlas Mountain Race? And yeah, talk to us a little bit about the distance that you have to go here.
Yeah, okay. So I should have had these numbers up in front of me. They should be burned in my brain at this point, but I'm going to say it's this year's edition of it was 833 miles, I think around 1300 kilometers. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 feet of climbing. So it is a lot of up time on the bike. Going through the high Atlas Mountains and the Anti-Alias Mountains, which is sort of the middle of Morocco. And it takes a loop from Marrakesh through the Atlas Mountains east, then loops back south and forms like a little crescent back to Essaouira, which is on the western coast of Morocco. Great surf town, great beautiful finish spot. And that, in a nutshell, is the Atlas Mountain Race. It's this year. It also was very cold. We had, that's the beautiful thing about bike pack racing and bike packing in general, is that you can do the same route that, year after year or even month after month, and it will be a completely different adventure, a different race. It will be a different race in most cases for the people who start and go fast and the people who are at the back. The people at the very end of this race took, I guess, probably 8, 9, 10 days to finish. And they encountered rain at the very end. So they had different challenges than the people who finished in 3 days and change at the very front of the race, who didn't experience any rain, but still had the freezing cold temperatures to contend with.
And
So yeah, that in a nutshell is Atlas.
Absolutely. And this, from watching from afar, I've always been interested. And I didn't realize, I looked up just before we started, the race is relatively new. I saw that it started in 2020. I thought this was a long-standing race going on.
No, 2020, just before the pandemic, February 2020 was the inaugural edition. And then it was delayed numerous times. Just ran for the second time in October of 2022, and this was the third edition. So I think the organizer, Nelson Trees, has designed a brilliant course. His name deserves some mention there. I think he's going to move to an annual race again, but he just had so much, so many registrations had been deferred, delayed, that it made sense, at least this time, to run it in the fall, and again then this past month.
Gotcha. And so to really wrap my head around this adventure, right? This 833-mile race. It looks like this edition had 3 checkpoints that you had to hit, and then a final. And there's no real established route, right? You can kind of go make your way whichever you need to. You just need to make sure you hit those checkpoints, and as well as, oh, go ahead.
No, yeah, for this one there's an established course. There are some races that operate as the Transcontinental is checkpoint based, and there are a couple of, they call them parkour sections, where you need to ride on the Transcontinental, but otherwise part of the strategy is you plan your route in between those checkpoints, and that is a mostly road race through Eastern and Western Europe. This, like a lot of single stage unsupported bike pack racing, has an established GPX track. The checkpoints did have closing times though, and so that there's no you can only resupply with things that are commercially available to all riders. So you can't cache food, and this goes for these unsupported events in general, which might be helpful to step back for a second and say, the clock starts, and there's no it's not a stage race. It is a cannonball run to the finish in any of these races. You need to stay, reasonably close to the GPS track. We were told if there is a perfectly fine trail 50 feet from a riverbed, and it looks like the GPS tracks goes through the riverbed, we can take the trail. But otherwise, you need to follow very close to the track. You can't draft others. Not that we were going fast enough to really merit drafting or really enable drafting. And you can't ask for help. You can't, if you ask for help, you can ask for help, but you are disqualifying yourself from the race. So, right. And the checkpoints did have cutoff times, just so that the race director, the course director, could control for and make sure that there weren't people out on the course well beyond when they'd be able to, assist or help if they got into a bad spot, really. So there was a fair amount of organization for this, even though it was unsupported. There are control cars out, there are media cars out. Nelson runs a really incredible organization. Some races aren't like that. They are just grand departs where the riders show up, you have an appointed time to leave. There is a tracker, and that's about all the organization you get. So this had a little bit more, but the spirit of it, the principle of it, unsupported, do it yourself, don't draft, don't accept help, was all pretty standard for bike pack racing.
Gotcha. And since we're on the topic of Nelson, I did see in an earlier interview that it sounded like that you had already applied previously to be a part of the Atlas Mountains way back in 2020.
Yeah, man, I was naive. I basically finished. I had a gravel bike at this point, and I strung together a 4-day trip to go meet some friends at the Finger Lakes for a summer vacation. And when I finished that, which was mostly road, right? I did go through some Pennsylvania dirt roads, which were nothing like what we rode here. They were, fire roads with nice gravel, and it was beautiful. I did it alone, and I pieced the route together. So, and I enjoyed it. I had never done back-to-back century rides before, and so when I realized that I could do that, and I enjoyed doing that, I immediately reached out to Nelson registration had been closed for what was supposed to be the fall 2021 rescheduling of the Atlas Mountain, the second edition of the Atlas Mountain Race, and asked him, "Hey, could I sneak in? Could you get me an application? Can I get on a waiting list?" I don't know who the hell I thought I was. I had no idea what the hell I was in for. And I don't know who he thought I was, but he he does have an application, mostly to make sure that you're familiar with mountain weather and the risks of being on a mountain. So it's not so much that I had to prove that I had done a lot of bike packing or bike pack racing, but that, through hiking, through scouts, through I lived in Colorado for a bit, that I was familiar with weather patterns, danger, hypothermia, what to do in situations to make sure I wasn't going to be a danger on the course. And he accepted me. That ended up getting delayed for COVID and delayed again in winter of 2022. In the meantime, I signed up for the Trans Virginia 550 and did a bike pack. It's about a 560 mile race through Virginia, similar elevation per mile. So it was a tough course, but shorter. Good starting race for me. Didn't have to contend with a foreign language or eating tagine constantly along the way. There were, and then I did, of course, Tour Divide during the summer as well, which gave me a ton of confidence. And so I entered this race after a couple of COVID reschedulings, much more prepared than my original naive self would have been when I signed up in 2021.
I like that you just went for it though, and that actually clears it up. I was wondering, I just kind of patching your timeline together, right? I know you didn't have that much experience cycling, but it looks like it's more focused on kind of outdoor skills is how you got accepted. How does the Trans Virginia compare to the Atlas Mountain Race?
Oh, so I finished Trans Virginia, and the guy who finished behind me, 67 years old, and this if you want a sport that will last you through your midlife crisis and beyond, find one that has a 67-year-old getting third place and like finishing shortly behind you.
Wise words.
Mitch is an inspiration. I asked him, how does this Trans Virginia compare to the Tour Divide? He said, oh, Tour Divide's longer, but if you can do this terrain is so tough. It's, just nasty mountain gravel. It's big rocks. Not a couple of tarmac sections, couple of rolling gravel sections, but a lot of Jeep track and just getting shaken and juddered all over the place. It's good fun, right? And a lot of climbing too per mile. Said if you can do this, you'll be fine on Tour Divide. And so I would really place the Trans Virginia 550 maybe just a hair behind Atlas Mountain Race. I think it's a pretty tough race. I mean, I've only done 4 at this point, but I would say Virginia knows how to kick some asses. Yeah. Atlas is by far though just in length, in distance, and in terrain, the hardest one yet.
Yeah, that's interesting though that you placed Virginia relatively close on the scale. I would have thought that Atlas Mountain would be way out in front in terms of difficulty, but it seems like somewhat comparable. Is that a reasonable?
Yeah, no, it's certainly, it's so difficult to hold them up against one another, and especially memory being what it is. Maybe Trans Virginia was just difficult for the moment I was in as my first race. Atlas is pretty damn hard, but I think if you bring the right bike to it, and if you've done training, if you have a little experience with hike-a-bike, it felt very, very hard, but it didn't feel impossible at any moment. The resupply is pretty. If you eat bread, and if you are okay eating eggs, you will eat a lot of those things. You'll be fine with food out here. And if you have, unlike me, if you have a front suspension or a dual suspension bike, if you have a full sus, you'll be pretty comfortable, I think.
Okay. Now I've picked up on the fact that you're definitely out here for enjoyment and as a sport that you can take and progress into older age with, and then as well as this community. But I have noticed that you're fairly competitive. Now, do you come in wanting to get a certain place or wanting to finish in a certain category?
No, it's funny you say that because I don't think of myself as a very competitive person. Maybe that's because I don't finish very very high in the rankings. But I do I compete with myself. I think my intention for this was to race it maybe a little harder. I think Tour Divide I held off, or was, you need to take a little bit more sleep. You need to be good to your body because it's a 2-week race minimum for the fastest people out there setting the records. And more likely, it was a 3-week race, a 20 day and change race for me. That's a lot of time on the bike. This was long, but I wanted to push myself as hard as I could. And I had some late night sleep deprived hallucinations, which is probably not healthy, but maybe a sign that I pushed myself as to that point a couple of times. So I'm definitely competitive with myself, and don't really think about, scratching is not an option. Which is not to say, if I had a catastrophic failure on my bike or a catastrophic injury, it's not to say I would be stubborn. But I think if I had a catastrophic failure in my bike and I thought that I could hike myself to the to the finish line in time, you know, I would pick the latter option if it was all at all available. So maybe where you say competitive, I say stubborn.
Okay. Well, you certainly have a lot of grit. That comes through. Now you've mentioned the Tour Divide, and I know you completed that. That is spanning Canada to Mexico, and the year that you ran it in the ballpark of 2,800 miles or so. Is that a reasonable?
2,700. It was a little shorter the year that I ran it because they had reroutes in New Mexico for fires, and then again more reroutes as we went through it for early season monsoons. It was a very tough year though. We had late season snow for all of the mountain passes, basically from Canada through Montana, which is roughly half the race. That's a big section of the country, even though it's just one territory and one state. So that added a lot of hike a bike and a lot of time just slugging through snow.
Now, it would seem like, just given the sheer mileage of the 2,700 miles, is that would slow you down and be less of a race and more of a completion event, or is that how you looked at it?
I think they're all kind of
Sure.
completion events. I mean, if you look at the scratch rate at a lot of these, my comments earlier notwithstanding, I think people have to define for themselves when it's the right time to scratch. Tour Divide in the first week had 15 people, 17 people hit the SOS button, and those were legit SOS hits. I think most of them, a lot of hypothermia. There was, in addition to the snowpack that was already there to contend with, there was a blizzard that swept through on the fourth and fifth day. So it's always a completion challenge. That's always, for me at least, the main goal, and I think for most people. But no, Tour Divide, Atlas, there are people at the front who are packing just insanely light. You would not believe, an emergency bivvy maybe at most, and then maybe crashing at a hotel 3 days after riding 3 days straight, whatever it might be. So there's always a contingent that is it's out for blood, I guess, or out for the race or for the FKT.
Sure.
And my goal is to finish strong. I don't think it's not about a position that I'm aiming for, but I don't want to finish with too much, if I finish with too much in the can, then did you really give everything that you could? So if you finish and you feel burnt out and you just want to fall over and sleep for 2 days, then you probably did it right.
Okay, chasing that feeling. Now, you mentioned some of the gear of the leaders, and that's what when I started getting into bike packing was something that really shocked me is that the people who are trying to win these races, it's shocking how little gear they bring. What was your gear setup? What did that look like for the Atlas Mountain?
Yeah, for me, it felt minimal. I brought a 40-degree bag, a sleep system. I
Sure.
guess we can start there. 40-degree bag, a bivy that was a little bit more robust than just an emergency bivy, and a thermarest pad. And I used the whole system once. The thermarest pad, on a very cold night is important as much for the comfort as the insulation on a really cold night. It got well below 40 degrees Fahrenheit most nights, but I found I have these little like down booty socks as well. So I found if I put my down puffer on, climbed in the 40-degree bag, climbed in the bivy, had the pad inflated beneath me, I was super cozy. As it got a little bit warmer and as I just pushed myself a little bit longer, I would just roll up by the side of the road, forget inflating my little inflatable pillow, just throw my helmet behind my head, put my puffer on, and lay on top of my bivy for a couple of hours just to try to wash my brain and get back on the bike. So that was sleep system. Repair kit I won't get into, but you've got to carry a pump, you've got to carry whatever you need to repair. Sidewall tears, I had zero mechanicals or tire issues, so didn't use any of that, but you can't leave that behind. One jersey, one bib, just what I wore with me. And then I did wear, we didn't have rain on the course, but a rain jacket and rain pants. So I look like I look like a human trash bag when I put both of those things on. But they keep the heat in as much as they keep the rain out. So it's kind of my early morning, 25 degrees outfit was to just throw everything I have on and hit the bike until the sun came
Now,
up. I think that's roughly the kit.
okay.
Yeah.
Now that sleep system seems to me pretty streamlined. I mean, a 40-degree bag is a pretty, as far as ranges go. I mean, I would call that a summer bag or so. But
Yeah.
and I know the Atlas Mountains, right? The temperatures get pretty frigid. I mean, the terrain from looking at the pictures, I would describe as amazingly beautiful, but also barren and perhaps a little bit freezing. It just looks cold and deserty. Cold, deserty, and mountainous, I think is how I would describe it. I mean, is that your thoughts being on the ground?
Oh, I think it's everyone's thoughts being on the ground. It was so cold. Nelson at the finishers party did say, so he had added about 75 miles to the course this year. It used to finish in Agadir, it now finished in Essaouira. And, like I said earlier, every year, every course is different because of the weather. And he said he thought this was the hardest course yet because of the added mileage and because of the cold snap that we had. The race starts, and if your viewers want to get a sense, or your listeners want to get a sense of this, definitely encourage them to go watch Into the Rift, which is the promotional video that Nelson made in year one, after year one of the race. Just really well done documentary. And, he describes that, the race pulls no punches. It goes straight for Mount Telouet, which is, a several 1,000-foot climb. This year, because of the added mileage, instead of starting at 9 a.m. on Saturday, he had us start at 6 p.m. on Friday, which had a lot of us, even seasoned folks, a little freaked out because I had not done an evening start before. And it kind of forced everyone's hand to ride through the night and to summit Mount Telouet on the coldest night of the course at 2 a.m. right? So it positioned us to get through the roughly 40 or 50 miles of relatively flat terrain leading up to the mountain. As the sun was going down, very pretty. You see these stark mountains off in the distance. And then you've barely gone anywhere and you have to make a decision. I guess a few folks did decide to summit it in the morning, but most people were just, flooded with adrenaline and time's a wasting. So we just hit the mountain around, 9, 10 o'clock or so. And you end up reaching the summit, which is a lot of hike-a-bike. It gets very steep at the very top. Yeah, around 2 in the morning with like negative 20, 25 degrees plus wind chill. So yes, it was, but it was also beautiful, right? So you're right. It's stark. It is arid. In a lot of places, we hit some lush areas. I mean, there's some beautiful contrast out there as well. But every time it was freezing cold, or it was the terrain was just unforgiving or challenging. All I had to do was look around me. That first night, the peak of Mount Teloet, you have these black and white snow dusted mountains. You are playing right smack in the middle of them. You're seeing them at eye level, right? You're seeing these other peaks at eye level, which is just insane. And it's an almost full moon that first night. So they are just bathed in moonlight. And you look around and you just have this line of headlights coming your way and a few taillights ahead of you. And you are out here playing in the mountains at 2 a.m. in the freezing cold with 200 other, kindred spirits. And you get to see those mountains in a way that only, mostly, we are 200 of very few people who get to see the mountains in that moonlight with that snow at that time of night. And anytime the terrain got tough, there was typically a moment of gratitude where you could just look around you and realize how special it was that you got to be there at that moment, and that whatever terrain you were fighting was also giving you back a lot of inspiration and beauty.
That's a really awesome perspective to have, and right, being in such a unique environment with all of those riders. Now, was your mindset that you were going to stay with a group the whole time, or was it just naturally going to spread out?
Yeah, I think so. Nelson does a couple of these races. The maybe the most famous is the Silk Road Mountain Race, which is a lot longer. It's in Kyrgyzstan. And I was listening to, it's developed a community. People come back to these races because they like the organization, they like the challenge. So listening to others who have done Silk Road, that spreads out very quickly. And the terrain in distance naturally scatters everyone pretty quickly. Here, it wasn't my intention to hang with a group, and I rode most of it pretty solo, but you would crisscross people pretty regularly. So you'd get to have a nice chat, for an hour or so, half an hour, and then you'd speed up, or in most cases they'd speed up. I would beat people on the climbs often. They'd beat me on the descents, because I'm not a very accomplished or confident descender. So yeah, it was a very, and then you'd run in at resupply. You'd catch people who are either in good spirits, low spirits, mid omelet bite, get to catch up for a couple of minutes, and then everyone would be off on their separate ways. So it was cool. It was a very social, but also very individual event.
Well, it's just kind of nice to be able to share it with everybody and then kind of internalize. It sounds like long parts, and then kind of have a collective camaraderie though. Now that
for sure,
absolutely. Now that first night into the morning, it sounds like you were running off a lot of adrenaline. Did you have a thought process in your head of how long you were going to go before you were going to sleep?
No, so yeah, I don't nap well, so I had been up since 8 a.m. Friday morning, and but I knew, I'd ridden through the night a couple of times before. That's not healthy. In fact, the science suggests it's very unhealthy. I don't, my preference would be to get at least 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night. And what's interesting actually is that this race, and I think the previous edition of Atlas Mountain, was won by somebody who got 3 to 4 hours of sleep each night. It was not won, as a lot of these have been, by the person who got the least sleep and spent the most time on bike, which is, I think that's an important, hopefully, turning point for some of the culture in bike packing. All that said, I knew I wasn't going to sleep the first night, and my goal was to make it to the evening of the second day. I didn't want to, I guess I could have napped a little bit in the middle of the day, but the days are so short. It's 12 hours of daylight right now in Morocco, 12 hours of night, that I didn't want to waste a single moment of seeing the terrain, of being able to ride in the daylight. So, yeah, I don't remember what time I think I made it to 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, a couple hours after the sun went down on the second night.
Now, yeah, and I would say 3 to 4 hours of sleep sounds pretty minimal to me to even start with. So right,
Sure.
right. And now, when you go to sleep, are you outside every night, or are you doing a motel situation sometimes? What does that situation look like?
Yeah, I had no idea what the situation was going to be. So there was a pretty good, Nelson does give some resupply ideas, and it's basically like, you know, here's a town, food, here's a town, hotels, restaurants, like a couple of words. And there are some points on his GPS track that will point you in some cases with a little more specificity, which was nice. But I don't speak French. I don't speak Arabic. Certainly don't speak Berber. And so I didn't know what to expect, if I'd be able to, in these smaller towns, if I would be able to ask the right questions, or what accommodations they would have. So I would say 4 out of 6 nights, I think I bivvied. There was one hotel in Taznacht that an English speaker at one of the storefronts pointed to this guy on a scooter and said, "Follow this guy on the scooter. He'll take you to a hotel." And I was like, "Oh my God, I hope that he is not going to try to bring me like 20 minutes out of town." So I followed him. I was like, I'll follow him for like 2 minutes, and if I get way off course, I'm just gonna bail. He took me to a hotel right on course. Fortunately, it was not much warmer than outside. It was like open windows, and but it was great. So got a hotel on night 3 or so, and then one of the checkpoints was also at a really nice, had some nice accommodations. So I slept for a couple of hours at one of the checkpoints. But otherwise, it was looking for a comfy patch of ground somewhere that didn't have so many loose fist-sized rocks in it, and rolling the bivvy out and just grabbing a couple of
Well,
Z's.
you mentioned that on those fist-sized rocks or so, you mentioned that the descents have been pretty tough. And watching a lot of the videos, it seems like it would be a real challenge to ride some of those descents. Was that the case?
It was for me. I mean, I can only speak for myself. So I had a rigid salsa cutthroat, which is described as more than a gravel bike, but less than like a full suspension flat bar mountain bike that you might picture that and that most riders brought. And it was fine for most of it. I don't think I don't do any mountain biking. I don't think anyone would describe it as overly technical necessarily, but it was a lot of loose rock, where, maybe similar sized rock to what I contended with in Virginia and you might find in parts of the southern Appalachians, but just loose and sliding everywhere. So yeah, I had a pretty bad accident in fall of 2021 where I split my lip wide open going a little too, taking a descent a little too fast. And putting myself in the Harrisonburg hospital for a day. So I think I'm still a little timid on the descents, and my goal is to get down them as quickly and safely as possible. Um, so other people were taking them at a few miles per hour faster than me, I'm sure.
There's an old cycling adage that you can't win a race on a descent, but you can certainly lose it. So I think think it's
Yeah.
probably good that you took it at a reasonable pace. Um, Now, I'm curious to hear more about your interactions with the locals. You had that one with the kind of the accommodations. But in general, are you moving so fast that you don't have a whole lot of time to kind of soak in the culture, or is there an opportunity to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do get the sense, I think the race moves faster than the culture in a lot of, and maybe that's true in small town America as well. And so I just was, I was conscious, or at least, wondering, am I being rude by leaving too quickly, by just shoveling this food into my face and heading out? I think for the most part, at least I was 40th or so out of 100 or so riders, so they had gotten the gist of it by the time I got there. Um, but no, I mean, who's to say whether I really got to taste the culture a bit? But I do love, you do get these little vignettes of the small town life as you go through, and in that way, I think it was, at the very least, I got a different, quick perspective of the culture that you don't get just by wandering the souks in Marrakesh, or staying in the cities, or even taking. I imagine, I haven't done this, but even taking some of the tourist
Mm.
trips out to some of the Berber villages, or the camel rides in outside of Marrakesh. Um, it wasn't as sterilized and packaged. So yeah, it was. I think it was a some nice snippets, some nice, like, slices of life, that I was privileged to at least witness along the way. I wouldn't say there was time to really immerse yourself in those slices of life.
Sure, sure. But to your point, and I always find that probably the most impactful is that getting to interact in a way that is perhaps more off the beaten path, or less off the tourist route, is always is always a very rewarding experience. Now, it sounds like you were able to stop in some of these towns and had a meal. Is that kind of how you approached food, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, it's good. It's good to have at least one hot meal a day, I think, is in bike pack racing, if you can get it. And in some, I think at least in one day, I took two if I ran into it. The resupply was both easy in that there were small shops within 30 to 40 miles in most cases. I think the longest we went without shop where you could get bottled water to refill, because you're not, there are no streams that you're filtering on this course. So unfortunately, a lot of it is buying plastic bottles of water to refill. Um, yeah, so resupply was available, but the sort of the snacks, that it was a lot of, like, cookies, crackers, crap, but not even high calorie crap like they sell in American gas stations. It's not even that, straight to my veins Snickers, 300 calories per bar sort of thing. So anytime I could get a hot meal that would, yes, please give me the 10 egg omelet. Um, that was a really, I think, important part of supplementing the little, like, crackers and pastries and cookies that helped, but it was just kind of, there wasn't a whole lot of, like, variety. You couldn't find gummies. There wasn't a whole lot of variety of even the typical cyclist junk food diet that you might find, gas station diet that you might find in the
I
States.
remember listening to your Tour Divide podcast, and it seems like you've got a particular affinity for Snickers bars from gas stations.
Oh, I think everybody does. It's the dirty secret of bike packing that we're all candy addicts. On that point though, it took me maybe 2 weeks to recover from Tour Divide. It took me a month, I feel like, to get over the processed sugar addiction that I developed, because I don't eat candy bars or drink Coke or soda really at all day to day. I don't drink juice. It's not that I don't have my bad habits, but I try to keep that stuff away unless I am cycling, 100+ days, and then it's no holds barred, right? So I guess the plus side of those things not being here, even though the things that we ate had sugar, they weren't healthy, but it wasn't as much of an assault, a full assault on your neurons as some of the candy bars in the States, is that I also don't feel like I'm leaving here with a sugar addiction, which is great.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and bringing up kind of the racing aspect, because I've only toured in a much, well, relatively speaking, much slower way, where you're not as dependent or as kind of what is the immediate solution. And it sounds like, right, the dirty secret is that gas stations, or in the case of Morocco, kind of those random corner stores are really the main food resupply points.
Yeah, I mean, there were, like I said, you could grab an omelet or a tagine at, a little restaurant at least once a day. But yeah, other than that, the food that you brought with you, I brought some gels with me from the States, and I did go to a grocery store beforehand. So for the first day and a half, I was eating a variety of like granola bars and nuts, and did have, some gummies and fruit snacks, and had a little bit more variety. Not, that was extra weight that I was carrying, that I may not have needed to, because there was plenty of resupply for that first day. But I had a feeling, just seeing what the corner stores looked like, that the resupply wouldn't have that much variety to it. So I was glad to have glad to have brought some variety along.
Absolutely. So staying on that, kind of the topic of I guess resupply and kind of access, did you have any mechanicals or any bike problems on the race? Wow.
None. It was wild. So plug for Renee Ar's Endurance Plus tires. I did not have a single puncture on the Tour Divide, 2,700 miles. Not that the terrain isn't that crazy. It's not trying to attack your tires as much, but there were plenty of sharp rocks here as well. And, some of that is probably my descending carefully and not getting a sidewall tear because of it. But yeah, just zero mechanicals, zero issues the whole time.
And, well, dare I ask, now, do you run tubeless as well? Is that your setup? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. It sounds like by the way you say that, that's the predominant across the board way to go.
Yeah, I think, you carry tubes with you for backup if the tubeless fails, because you have to it's very difficult to get it seated again if you do have a tear or something, and you take the tire off to patch it. But yeah, it's the tubeless sealant is just a game changer. And I think if you at all have the option, you'd be silly not to take it. If you don't have a bike that has tires that do tubeless, I think, run what you brung. Don't not get into it because you don't have it, but be prepared for more flats.
Sure. Well, and not only that, right now with you could run tubeless, it's such a low pressure. So I'm imagining as these days go by, it's just less affected by the changing conditions. So you've got it's a real opportunity, like really good piece of gear there.
Yeah, that's right. It's right. That's added suspension. When you can run tubeless and drop your pressure like that, it gives you a little bit more comfort.
Now,
for sure.
Had you had a mechanical, Are there bike shops along the route? Are there options, or is it kind of you're limited to the repair stuff that you have brought with you?
You see some creative stuff. I feel like in the Into the Rift video, like there's some welding happening. There's. I don't know that there are bike shops anywhere along the way. Maybe in, where was Checkpoint Three? Checkpoint Three was a bigger town, but nothing. Yeah, I don't. I mean, they wouldn't have like they can't fix your electronic shifting. They probably, they're not gonna have SRAM products in stock. They might be able to jerry rig something for you if your derailleur pops off, but mainly you need to carry what you need. So like high risk spares, you carry a couple of spokes. Thank God I didn't have to use those. I've never had to replace spokes before. Knock on wood. It's a long way out. And a derailleur hanger, which again, I'm very grateful I didn't have to use, but heard of a couple of folks who bent a derailleur hanger on some of those rocky descents.
I feel like that's kind of the go-to problem that can become a bigger problem. The trying to replace a hanger in the field is always a challenge. Now you mentioned that the weather all in sounded pretty good for you. It was cold, but no rain, nothing like that.
Yeah, no, it was dry at least. And so I think if it's going to be cold, much prefer it to be cold and dry. I think the risk of hypothermia is not none, but it's lessened if you don't have to worry about keeping your down puffer from getting wet. So yeah, that made things a little easier to deal with for sure.
Now, did you find that your mentality changed, or that as the race wore on, from getting to checkpoint 1, but then to checkpoint 2, and then to checkpoint 3, how did your mental state change? How did did you change up the pace? Yeah.
Yeah, I worry about that. So we were talking before. I think you hit record that I had like one dark day in Tour Divide, and it was not even the most challenging day. It was just sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back that I didn't know was the straw that was going to break the camel's back. A section of sticky mud that I had to pull my bike through. And I'll come back to to your question about AMR, I promise. But this was after days and days of hike a bike through snow. And I think in, reflecting on it, what changed my attitude, or what affected my attitude in that moment, was the expectation that somehow those miles were going to be easy, and suddenly they weren't, and woe is me. And I got through it, and I bounced back and had a really good race. But I entered this race not only with more training, more miles. I did over 10,000 miles on the bike last year, which is a big year for me, I think for anyone. Mm-hmm. So I knew I had the physical training, but I think that mental training of taking things as they come a little bit more, and planning, but not there's only, you can take a look and try to interpret a track, right? You can say, oh, this looks like a straight line. It's off-road, and it's pretty low. If there's not a whole lot of elevation gain, I'm gonna bet that that's like a nice countryside road. No, it's 10 miles of sandy dunes that Nelson has just stuck at the very tail end of your race, that everyone has to hike their ass through for 3 hours, 4 hours of just sand, not unrideable without overexerting yourself completely. So I think I did a pretty good job, even in that moment where I had let my expectations sort of develop a picture of how the race was going to go. I did a pretty good job at each point, just sort of breathing in, accepting where I was at, trying to be grateful for what I had. Be grateful if the road is really nice, or the surface is really nice, or the scenery is really nice. Be really grateful for that moment. Remember that moment can change, that it probably will change. And And likewise, with pacing, be firm with myself and wake up and obey the alarm clock. But also, if it feels unsafe and my head is just sort of, if I feel unsafe on the bike, also being gentle with myself, jumping off the bike and remembering like, that there's a long game here too, and that is like me not getting hit by a car in the last 10 miles of the race. So did I answer your question? I think I had a pretty consistent attitude through the entire race. I remember at one point, Nelson had mapped out these 5 most difficult sections just to be aware of. And I made it through 2 or 3 of those. And in my like sleep deprived, calorie deprived hallucinations, I remember thinking of this scene from The Never-Ending Story. Which have you seen?
I
The
haven't seen
Never-Ending
the
Story?
never ending story. I have, oh no, oh
No.
no,
Oh,
we can't really,
how old are you?
36.
Okay,
Am
yeah,
I in
that's
the
in the ball. You're
am
an
I in the,
80s kid.
barely at the, yeah, I was young in the
Barely.
80s. I actually haven't heard of it, to be
So
honest
there's
with you. I haven't heard of it.
what? Okay, all right. Well, I swear it was popular at some
Okay.
point. A certain demographic will know exactly what I'm
Good.
talking about, and the rest of the demographic will have a recommendation to go at. But I remember thinking at a certain point, like after I passed the second or third difficult spot, this picture in my mind of uh, the main character in the Neverending Story reaches this oracle, and it's these 2 sphinx-like statues that are supposed to look into your soul and see who you truly are. And if you are worthy, you will pass the oracle. And if you're not worthy, laser beams jump out of their out of their eyeballs and burn you alive. And it was terrifying as a kid because it was like you don't know if you are worthy until you get up there, right? You don't know if the main character's worthy until he gets up there. And he passes by this knight at the suit of armor and flips up the mask, and it's just a burnt husk. 80s movies were terrifying for children. I don't know who let them make the movies like this. So he walks up to it, and you're anticipating like, will Atreyu get zapped, or is he truly worthy? And he ends up like getting zapped and dodge rolling out of it, whatever the case might be. But like, and so you don't know, like maybe the whole thing's a farce, and it doesn't really matter if these sphinxes think he's worthy or not. But I remember getting through those difficult sections and sort of tearing up because I felt like I just dodge rolled through the Sphinx, and I came out not because I got through it and because it was hard, but because I got through it and I was
Hmm.
happy. And I got through it and I was not a miserable person getting through it. And that I felt really proud of how I was responding to the situation, that I felt like I was being tested, and maybe in a way that I felt a little bad about how I responded to that test one day in the Tour Divide. I think overall I had a pretty good attitude. That I felt, at each moment here, I made it through the Oracle. I made it through the Sphinx, and felt like I kept my head on my shoulders for it. That was a go watch The Neverending Story, children, please.
Well,
It's a
I
classic.
definitely have now. I've got another movie on my list. It just sounds like a great analogy of really coming through the crucible and coming out on the other side. Um, and it's interesting how much you're wrapping this into the idea of, I guess I would say, mental toughness and kind of developing it. And it seems like as you reflect through these various races, that is a perhaps a skill that you've honed, and would you also say that that is a critical skill in order to complete these sort of challenges?
Yeah, I think so. I think and they're yes, I think they are mostly a mental. I think it is probably mostly a mental game. Um, the physical piece you can train yourself through. I mean, you can get off and walk if you don't feel like you can power your legs up a certain part of the hill. Um, but if you're not comfortable with yourself, if you're not comfortable with being alone, if you're not confident in yourself, and if you don't sort of take things as they come, it can be an exercise in frustration. If you don't have try to cultivate that perspective of gratitude, I think really helps. That because this is a privileged thing. It's not like we are doing this to survive, right? It is a bunch of privileged people who have expensive bikes and equipment, who have the privilege of taking time off work to get out here and go play in the mountains and go do a hard thing. And so I think it is largely a mental game. And I think about that a lot. I read, in prep for the Tour Divide, I read a lot of direct Stoics and also practicing Stoic, a book for the practicing Stoic, which kind of sums up a lot of Stoic thinking. I think that what I sort of taking things as they come has a lot of Buddhist thought associated with it as well, sort of the intersection of Buddhism and Stoicism. But the final point I'll make is I also think a lot about what am I going to do with those skills when I get back home? Because I think I know that this is an adventurer's podcast, and that can be a really important part of learning these sort of skills. But I'm also an existentialist and am like a Simone de Beauvoir adherent. And, what she says about the adventure is that fixation is very selfish, right? And that if you are not taking that and figuring out, okay, what am I going to do with these new skills, with the way that I've been able to get through hardship and expand my own freedom, how am I going to use that to expand others' freedom and impact, my friends, my family, my community, in a positive way? I think that's what I hope. I haven't figured that part out completely. I don't think any of us have. But my hope is that coming out here and playing in this sort of way and developing that mental toughness is not just about like me being a better person, but hopefully being better equipped when I get back home to help other people as well, or be there for their challenges, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think I would also chime in and riff off that one is that I would also say that you're certainly inspiring others, not only to go out and do their adventures, but to go out and overcome their personal challenges, whether they're outdoors or, career wise, relationship wise. It's all kind of mountains to climb, if you will. Now, what kind of preparation did you do for this specific Atlas race?
So this was a real experiment, and the experiment was: can you train on Zwift almost exclusively for the 3 months leading up to an outdoor race and develop the fitness needed to complete it? The answer seems to be yes, but you don't use, of course, like there are no stabilizer muscles. I did have to like remember a lot of stuff that I used obviously on Tour Divide and a short race in West Virginia that I did in the fall. But yeah, it was mostly, it was cold. I didn't want to do exposure training anymore. I had plenty of exposure training at the Tour Divide and elsewhere. I knew that I was fine in cold weather, had my systems dialed. And so it was part laziness and part just lack of inspiration. It takes 20 miles. I don't own a car, and it takes 20 miles to get out of Philly onto anything that might be a more remote back road. Gravel is tough to come by, except for the same gravel roads that I've ridden pretty often. And so I did. I just stuck with Zwift. I ended up it was much better for like high intensity training and doing some actual like speed work, which was cool. I didn't really do that before Tour Divide. So yeah, that was it right up until, I was not outside on my bike right up until the day before the race departed, when I took like a 20-mile spin.
That's incredible.
I don't recommend that for anybody who's starting bike pack racing.
Sure. We'll add an asterisk to that answer right there. That's incredible, though. I thought you were gonna make the bold statement of saying, "Hey, I didn't do any rides with my pack on or with my right setup," but you didn't do any rides outside at all.
Yeah. Yep. Don't recommend it.
Do you feel that this is like something like the Tour Divide? At the You're at the point where you could do that, where it's primarily, if you just focus on physical fitness, you've kind of accumulated that skill set to be able to hop into races and events like these, or was it the specific nature of the Atlas Mountains race?
Well, I think it's the specific timing of the Atlas Mountain race. Being in February, there were some really cold days, and there are people. I have friends who, of course, are riding through all of it. Would never. They're appalled when they see my Strava and it's Zwift. They're absolutely appalled that I'm riding indoors, even when it's like below 30 out. But man, I just don't want to. I don't want to have to dodge traffic and get in my. There's so much. The other nice thing about just jumping on your trainer is I can just put like running shorts on if it's a short workout, or like a tank on. I don't have to faff around with like all of the kit that you need for cold weather. I have a friend who just posted on Instagram that he's going out in DC today for a ride this morning, and he looks like a stormtrooper. He's just like, kitted out from top to bottom, cannot see a thing on his face. So, yeah, I think it's the sort of thing where I, it got really cold here, and I was fine. I mean, it was cold, it was hard. I brought out like hot hands warmers. I may not have had like the best gloves for it because you make trade offs for weight, but yeah, I'm comfortable. Knowing that I can, I'll be fine in like inclement weather and actually enjoy it when I'm part of a race as opposed to hitting the same 20 30 miles in Philly in freezing cold weather.
I'm spoiled here being in Southern California that it's more or less year-round rideable weather. I know, but I will say I can definitely understand is that it does take some time just getting everything set up on a bike and ready for a ride versus just hopping on a trainer is a much more streamlined process. So that I find that appealing as well. Um, Now, looking forward, what are your ambitions in terms of future projects?
Yeah, I would really love to do Silk Road Mountain Race. It's not going to happen this year. My I mentioned Society of Hospital Medicine at the top. My boss, my colleagues, my coworkers are just incredible, and I've taken time that I have, so it's a generous PTO policy, and I've taken 3 weeks off to come to Morocco and link up some touring because I've never been to this continent before. I took 4 weeks off for Tour Divide last year. I'm kind of pressing, even though it's PTO. I feel like I'm pressing my luck a little bit. And they haven't made me feel that way. They've been really great, supportive. I just came back to a bunch of messages on the map progress from my coworkers, but yeah, it's probably going to be local stuff this year. I may go back and do the Trans VA 550 again, or there's a shorter gravel version that might just be fun to bomb down, called the 520. There's a Pittsburgh to Philadelphia unofficial race called Crush the Commonwealth, which is sort of a 24-hour race across the state. That sounds like fun. But in terms of big adventures and international adventures, unfortunately, it's probably 2024 before I'll get back out to anything.
Well, that's really cool. Kind of hearing too how you balance a full career schedule with kind of your adventure ambitions, if you will. Is there it seems like you're pushing it right up to the limit of the balance spectrum. I guess is how I would phrase that. That's very very nice to be in such a generous PTO situation. Do you have any thoughts or ambitions of being able to convert over to being a full-time adventurer, full-time, as part of your career, or are you happy kind of keeping that kind of multiple aspects of your life?
No, I think I like the multiple aspects. I like the variety. I was living in Steamboat Springs for a couple of years, teaching middle school English, and I also love skiing. Um, but I found after 3 years that it is people who are going out there for the adventure. They're going out there for the outdoors. I love that stuff. I mean, obviously I wouldn't be out here sleeping in ditches on the side of the road in Morocco if I didn't love that stuff. That will always be a really important part of my life. But I also love art. I love theater. I love, um, I do really like my job. I like I like working with other people and contributing back through the nonprofit. I like Philly. I like the community and volunteering in that community as well. So yeah, it'll be. I don't have a full on adventurer bug, and that will probably I like being grounded in a place. Um, but that said, I'd love to increase the quota of adventure in my life um, over time, and hopefully, if I'm lucky enough to meet someone and have a family, to make sure that that's a value that we all share and that we can do together. So I don't know that adventure doesn't always have to be racing. I'm really looking forward to using my bike to do some maybe more laid back touring or bike pack touring. Um, I've got a new nephew in Japan that I need to go visit. And it would be really fun to bring my bike and after hanging out with him and my brother and my sister-in-law for a little bit to tour Japan or tour Southeast Asia. So there's a whole, I mean, it's a huge world. There's a whole lot to do, and I've got to figure out the balance between that and all of the things that I love about being rooted in community as well.
Wow, fantastic. Nick, that's such a great answer and a real insight into kind of the holistic and all around aspects of your life. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I want to congratulate you on the Atlas Mountain Race on completing, and say safe travels back.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me on. It was a treat to get to meet you, and thanks for the opportunity to reflect a little bit on this race.